Hello there. Okay, nope, not today. If you'll look behind me in our set, if you will, you'll notice an issue. Something that is usually here, but is not currently here. Give you a second, take a minute, feel free to guess in the comments. Okay, well, I'll just tell you anyways. The issue is these are empty right now. Now, if you don't know, these are my canisters that I usually store my coffee in. So I can just dose it out and I'm ready to brew. However, we are out of coffee. Now, the sensible thing to do in this situation would be to either go to the store or go to a local roaster and pick up a new bag to refill those canisters with. However, we've never ever done the sensible thing on this channel, so I think we should go kind of a step further here. And in fact, this is a perfect little segue into a topic that I've wanted to learn more about for a very long time because I'm a barista. I've done most every coffee thing that has to do with brewing or prepping coffee or any of that. However, there is this entire other side of coffee that I've never dived into myself, that being roasting the coffee. Now, generally, when you think about roasting, you think about like professionals doing this. You have your roasters who have all their knowledge about their roast profiles, when first crack is happening, when second crack is happening, what they are bringing out of the coffee profiles flavor-wise with how they're roasting the coffee. They have these massive roasters and all the equipment and all the good stuff. And then you have home roasting, and you can roast coffee at home. It's very possible, and there are many different ways to do it. I don't know any of them, but I think we should start somewhere down this roasting journey, so that's what we're doing today. I'm gonna go get the things we will need today because we will need some stuff. In the meantime, while I go collect all of that, I want to give a huge thank you to the sponsor of today's video. I want to give a huge thank you to Morning Brew for sponsoring today's video. If you're anything like me, you probably spend your mornings groggily scrolling through social media and struggling through the day's Wordle. Sometimes it can be an absolute slog just to sift through what news you actually want to read and what's put on your many feeds each day. But here's where Morning Brew comes in. Morning Brew is a free daily newsletter that is delivered Monday through Sunday with witty, informative news that's curated to keep you up to date on everything from business to finance to tech in just 5 minutes. Now, instead of just playing Wordle, I can read about it too. Or hey, there's the Morning Brew Mini if you're a puzzle person. So if you'd like to join me on reading your daily Morning Brew, it's super easy. All you have to do is click the link in my description and subscribe, which is free and will take you less than 15 seconds to do. Again, it's the top link in the description, and thank you again to Morning Brew for sponsoring today's video. Okay, the first thing we need is clearly a piece of equipment. Now, there are many different pieces of equipment out there that are geared towards home roasting. Anything from like whirly popcorn makers to very, very like small versions of the coffee roasters that like a professional might use in a more like industrial setting. However, we've got to start somewhere. And while I think we should ultimately explore all the different methods of home roasting there are to figure out which one works best for us, we gotta start somewhere. And we are starting here with this thing. Now, this right here is a little countertop roaster, and it's pretty simple in its principles. You can primarily roast coffee in it, but if you really wanted to, you could also roast other seeds or nuts or like whatever have you, because the principle of coffee roasting is that you are applying heat to the green beans, that being the coffee that is not roasted yet, still in like a green format. And at the end of all of that, you have brown coffee. That is the most generalized, most basic description of coffee roasting I can give you. So if you wanted to do that for nuts as well or anything like that, you could use this as well. However, we're using coffee today. And speaking of coffee, I may be out of roasted coffee, but I've got a bag of green right here. Now, coffee beans themselves are not actually beans. They're in fact like the seed of a coffee plant. They live inside like a cherry fruit-like sort of thing when they're growing, and then in processing, after they've been picked, that cherry is removed at some point, whether it is before drying or after drying. The coffee beans are dried, and then they are shipped over to wherever they are going to be roasted, either in the producing country that they were grown in, or potentially they are exported over to like the United States, where we have these green beans now. So coffee roasters take these unroasted green beans, and then they are able to go through the roasting process and take them to the roast level and the flavor profile of their liking. So there's a lot of customizability once you receive this sort of green coffee. You can have like 4 different roasters that have the exact same green coffee that's been processed the exact same way. And at the end of their roasting process, you will have 4 very differently tasting coffees. Very cool. Anyways, let me plug this in. So the principle of this roaster is pretty simple. Let me show you the very few moving parts on this, because I think this is a good place to start, because it's arguably, you don't need to know a ton to operate this, which I think is a good place for me and for you to start. We're gonna get more complicated as this series goes on, on, but this is a comfortable place to begin. So we have the lid, very little to say about that. And then inside the main basin of this coffee roaster, you have this little metal bar here that is gonna spin. This is very similar to like a whirly pop popcorn maker. I think that's the best way to describe this entire process. And it's very similar. You have your base here. There is a heating element underneath here. So this is gonna heat up. This is what the beans are gonna sit on. And then this is gonna keep those beans constantly moving. So we're getting a full rotation on all the beans. In theory, they're gonna be roasting evenly and they're not gonna like scald or burn in one single way with like one side of them only touching the heating element. Besides that, the front of it is pretty simple. You have, oh my gosh, you have an on and off switch. You have a knob that controls the temperature of what you're heating. You also have a timer that controls the timer. So if you want to, if you have your roasting procedure dialed in, you can kind of just set it, leave it, and come back, and in theory, you have roasted coffee. Now, as I've stated before, I've never done this before, so let's go. Okay, so we're gonna wanna start this preheating. So set that, turn it on, and then I'm gonna show you real fast. You should not move this around while it's in operation, but real fast, let me just show you what is happening inside. Your little whirly pop tool has started spinning inside nice and evenly. You know, at least it turns on. I think that's a great start to all of this. Now this right here has a capacity of about 400-ish grams of coffee. Now we're gonna wanna be careful not to hit that like maximum level because, let me show you. Now if you can see in my tiny shaky hands, this green coffee is much smaller than this brown roasted coffee that we have right here. And that's because in the roasting coffee, there is gonna be some element of expansion in these beans. We wanna be careful that we haven't already maxed out our capacity, because if we do, you will have the potential of the beans not moving anymore because it's all packed together, or you have the potential of some beans being pressed against the heated bottom while some of them just continue to rotate on top, meaning you have beans that are gonna be far more roasted and or burnt in worst case scenario at the bottom, whereas some of them aren't, and it's just gonna be uneven. It's probably not gonna be very tasty. So just be mindful of that. I say like you're following along at home. That being said, I think I'm gonna aim for right around 200 grams coffee beans. This should leave us with a nice amount of coffee at the end of all of this, as well as not overloading our little buddy right here. Wait, no. What do you think about what we have going on here? Friend, I love you, but you have to leave the premises. Now that our roaster is heated up, we're gonna put our beans in, and in theory, we're gonna be looking for first crack in about 20 minutes is the estimated time with something like this. So we're gonna put stuff in, we're gonna leave it, and we will see what happens. Ability to see the second angle right now, but if you will look, you'll start to see that we're reaching more of like a yellow stage. The beans are changing color. They are no longer that like kind of like muted like minty green that they were before. Minty? I don't know if minty. Anyways, what we've reached now is kind of a yellow stage, and they will continue to darken until we reach that rich brown color of like a medium roast, because that is hopefully what I'm aiming for right now. Graham, come look at my beans. Look what's happening. I do be making coffee beans.
Beanin'.
And they're beaning right now. You proud of me?
Yeah.
Okay, hello. Speaking to you once more from the other side. We're reaching a very exciting point right now. This is what's called first crack. If you listen very carefully, you're able to start to hear some like popping, cracking sounds, kind of similar to like popcorn kernels when they pop. Essentially what's happening right now is that all the moisture that was trapped within inside those green beans has now evaporated, been forced out of the beans through this repeated like exposure to heat. And what's happening is, since that heat is continuing to being applied, the beans themselves are starting to like expand and crack open. It's pretty self-explanatory. Also at this stage, a lot of the sugars and all that delicious stuff that creates the flavors that we know as coffee have begun to caramelize in a way. This leaves us with this like nice brown color, and it also leaves us with really tasty flavors, rather than like if you grind up green coffee and try to brew it, you're not gonna have anything like remotely similar to coffee. So all in all, we are in a very good place right now. Now, as I mentioned before, we are aiming for like a medium roast. I don't wanna take this too dark, but I wanna be careful that it's not like underdeveloped or under roasted as well. Meaning I'm gonna let this run for a little bit longer now that first crack has essentially happened. I don't want it to reach second crack. That can happen. It can continue cracking. At that point, you get towards really darker roast, and then at some point you just have burnt coffee. That is very possible as well. So we're gonna let this run a little bit longer. Then we have to let it cool. We have to make sure we sort out any of the chaff that's happening. These are kind of like papery shells that are around the beans, and when these get roasted, that chaff will start to separate. You basically, it's It's fine if there's like a little bit in your coffee, it's not the end of the world, but you don't want like a lot of chaff in your coffee. So we will separate that, and then we're gonna brew some coffee. I'd like to present to you coffee roasting ASMR. Thank you, I hope that was enjoyable for everyone. All right, well, for better or for worse, we've created something that sure looks like roasted coffee. Let's take a little bit of a closer look. Now it's been cooling for a little bit. I transferred it into a colander here just because this surface here inside the roaster, if you will, is still very hot. If you try to let it cool inside the roaster, all you're gonna do is continue to let it cook, and then you are reaching those much darker, like burnt levels that we're not essentially chasing here. Now let's take a little bit of a closer look here. So we have our beans, and then this lighter papery stuff right here. This is the chaff. This is that stuff that we want to sift off. It's all right if there is a tiny bit of it. It's that like outer shell of the bean that has burst off once the bean expanded, essentially. Since I think this ultimately also has to be a search for the best home coffee roaster, there is one thing I will note already that I think kind of puts a little bit of a sour note on this method of roasting within this brand of roaster, is that I am seeing already quite a lot of color variance between the beans. Ideally, when you are roasting coffee beans, or even when you're purchasing coffee beans, kind of a rule of thumb is you want everything to be the same color. That means everything's been roasted to the same level, and you're gonna have a very even extraction, and it just kind of, it demonstrates care in the roasting process. However, we look in here and we have like this bean right here. We also have this bean right here. Now, both of these, this one right here is a little bit on the darker side of what I wanted, and this is way too light. Whoops. However, for the most part, even just doing like an overhead glance, you can visually see all the color difference that we have here, which is not great, but for a first try at coffee roasting, I gotta say, I'm not mad. Let me get this chaff all sorted out real fast, and then afterwards, it's time to brew some coffee. I will say that this process will leave you with chaff just everywhere in your kitchen. Now we have sifted out a majority of the chaff, and in that process, our coffee has cooled quite a bit. So in theory, we are good to use it. Now, I am gonna take the extra step in this process, and I'm gonna hand sort the beans that I'm gonna use in this brew. Because as I mentioned before, there is a lot of color variance in this method, which means you are likely to end up with a brew that is probably not gonna be great. That being, you have beans that are under roasted, and you also have beans that are over roasted, and you have beans that are in the middle, which is that profile that we were going for. It's all very strange, and I think if we just do this by hand, because we're just making a pour over, I only need 20 grams of coffee beans at the end of all of this. So this shouldn't take too long. This also, if you are hand sorting your beans as well, I'm pretending you're following along, honestly. This is another really good opportunity to make sure you really just don't have any chaff going into your final brew. Don't know why I spaced out my words like that. You know, for all the mistakes that I have undoubtedly made during this process, for all my lack of knowledge, and for all the mistakes I've made that I didn't even know I made, I gotta say, there's a serious level of satisfaction to doing this. This feels akin, you know, at one point in my life, my family had like a little garden patch where we grew vegetables and stuff like that. And there was something so immensely satisfying about going out to the yard and like picking something that one would usually buy in a store, but it's something that you grew yourself. That is the same feeling I'm feeling right now. Like, it's very cool to have roasted my own coffee here. Will it be good? Probably not. I don't think anything I do on my first try is very good, but it's about the process. And if we get a good end product, it's about that too. However, this is a learning procedure for both of us. So the fact that we will get something that should be coffee tasting like, good enough for me right now. 20 grams of pretty evenly colored beans. My hands are covered in chaff. Let's get these ground and let's brew some coffee. Now, we are gonna do something a little bit controversial here, and that is brewing with coffee that is directly off of roast. I mean, this is kind of as fresh as you can get it. Generally, when you roast coffee, you will want to let it sit or rest for a little bit because there are still gases that are being released from this entire process, specifically CO2, and generally you wanna let those dissipate a little bit before you try to drink whatever you're gonna make with it. This is even more important with espresso, let's say, because if you're using super fresh coffee straight off roast, generally you'll end up with an espresso that is incredibly fluffy and has a very thick crema on top. And usually that's like a weird balance and it doesn't taste super good. There are exceptions, of course, to all these. There's always exceptions, but it's just kind of a rule of thumb that you let it rest for a little bit. We're not gonna do that. And I imagine if you are roasting at home in a scenario similar like this, you're probably drinking it pretty quickly. So this is fine. This pour is just to pre-wet my filter. Don't mind me. Our coffee, it smells a little bit on the darker side than what I was hoping for. But that being said, appearance-wise, I think we are very much still in that medium roast territory. It's not very complex on the nose. It's just a lot of kind of like dark chocolate, which is kind of like a baseline. It's a very baseline flavor note for something like this. Do you want a little bit of a closer look? Let's give you a closer look. And now the slow, arduous process of waiting for our pour over to finish draining. And with that, we have achieved a cup of coffee completely of our own making. The good news is it looks like coffee. It sure smells like coffee. If it tastes like coffee, I'm gonna be a very, very happy person today. It's not a great cup of coffee. It is okay. It does taste like coffee. It is assuredly darker than what I would usually drink, but I gotta say, there is like a maternal aspect of all of these over the fact that I have like prepared this from start to finish that really overshadows any of the lack of complexity or like development that happened during this coffee process. This, all in all, is an okay cup of coffee. It's fine. It's like I would put cream in this and I would really enjoy it. As it is though, it's okay. That being said, I think there are some issues with this method. I don't think I can claim this method of home roasting as being my favorite. We have many more to try. Hopefully we will have better and better cups of coffee each time, but this itself, we'll give this a 4 out of 10. I think there are some big issues with the amount of color variant you receive in your beans because everything is not being cycled super evenly in here. I think this takes quite a while, but that being said, this was a nice starting place. I feel like I learned a lot about this process, even with this just first step, and hopefully you did as well, because believe me, we will have many more versions of roasting coffee to come. I think I will actually go do what I just mentioned. I'm gonna go put a little bit of cream in this, and I'm gonna go enjoy it. I hope this was kind of educational. Some of you, it was very educational for me. And again, I very much encourage you, like always, to leave any tips or tricks or any comments or fun facts about yourself you'd like to in the comments down below. I will be reading through them because, as I've mentioned like 3 times, this will be a series. I intend to get better at home roasting, and I would love to know any advice that you have. That being said, I'm Morgan Drinks Coffee pretty much anywhere you can find me. I'm here on YouTube once a week, plus some shorts. You can also find me on TikTok or Instagram almost every day. I'm gonna go finish this up. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.